All right, I'm Chris Campbell. I'm a practicing CPA, and I work with small businesses and individuals to help them pay the least amount of taxes possible while keeping them out of jail. So today I wanted to talk about more of a money-saving tactic, not necessarily a tax-saving tactic. It's an experience that I went through. And as I went through the experience and I was telling others about it, I was actually pretty surprised about how little people knew about this, and I found that it would be a great way to save money. So today I wanted to talk about flat fee real estate brokerage. Real estate agents, you may not like me for this one, but I wanted to talk about my experience with it. A while ago, I went through the process of selling a property that I owned. It was an investment property. It was a property I used to live in, but turned it into an investment property. And so I sold it. However, I used what's called a flat fee broker. Now, the reason why I went this route was because with most traditional real estate agents, they charge a percentage. I think the normal is about 6%. I think it can fluctuate if you get a better deal, might go down as low as 4%. But typically between 4 and 6% for the sale, you have to allocate that to real estate agents. As I was selling my property and I'm going through everything, as I'm running the numbers as far as what this could potentially sell for, and I'm looking at what I would have to potentially pay a real estate agent, I wasn't too happy about that. And when I did the math, I said, is a real estate agent really going to be providing that much value that I have to give you 6% of the transaction? In my particular case, it was an investment property. It was in good shape, and it was in a pretty populated area. I was pretty confident that I wasn't going to have a problem selling the property and finding buyers for the property. I just felt that 4 to 6% for what I anticipated happening was a realtor or an agency coming along and simply putting it on the MLS, putting it on Zillow, all these other websites at this point, and essentially get 4 to 6%. My train of thought was, hell, I can do that myself. Why am I paying 4 to 6% property that essentially what they're doing is just listed on the internet to get the buyers? I figured I can do that myself. So I dug deeper into this, and I said, maybe I can just do a for sale by owner. So I considered that, and I did a bit more research into that, doing the for sale by owner. However, I realized that the way that the realtors are set up, what is it, the National Association of Realtors? I don't know the exact name of the association, but I do know that the way that they have their listings set up, and when you go to the websites, the MLS, is that you can't get on the MLS without being associated with a broker. And then I've also discovered that on sites that aren't necessarily tied to a brokerage, like the Redfins, Zillows, those sites that aren't necessarily a brokerage, but they pull from the MLS, they have to identify you distinctly as a for sale by owner on these websites. And I guess that's part of the deal that these websites have in order to be able to access and pull data from the MLS. If you ever notice that if you go to these Zillow sites, Redfin sites, the for sale by owner listings are at a distinct disadvantage. And they're not as prominent. So I did notice that. So after doing all that research, I determined that the whole for sale by owner might not work in my best interest. So I looked deeper and I found this flat fee broker. So essentially how it works, if you don't know already, your property is listed with a brokerage. However, instead of the typical commission percentage, your 4 to 6% commission, they will list your property for a flat fee. So I went out and got the brokerage, and I believe their fee was like $300. So for $300, I was able to get my listing on the MLS, and I was represented by a broker. So, and I figured that was win, for me, because essentially, I really just wanted to be on the MLS. And I figured once my property got on the MLS, everything else would take care of itself as far as getting the traffic, getting the people in, that type of thing. So I went ahead and did that. So it is something that can save you a lot of money. This could be something that you could use as well, whether it's your own home property or even if you're an investor and you're selling maybe an investment property. If you're familiar enough with the market that you think you can do it on your own, it may work for you and save you a good amount of money. Now, a couple things you have to consider. For this thing to work, one, you have to be willing to do some legwork. With my experience, in order to sell the property, I had to have a fire inspection done and get approved from the town. So I actually had to go down to City Hall and coordinate the fire inspection. Now, I'm assuming that if I had a traditional realtor, that might have been something that they might have handled and I wouldn't have had to worry about that. But I went down there, it took me maybe about an hour and a half, 2 hours out of my time to get that coordinated and get cleared by the city. So you have to be prepared to do some legwork. The other part is I didn't save the full 4 to 6% on the commission because I did allocate a commission percentage to the buyer's broker. So when your listing goes on the MLS, it lists the listing broker, which is my flat fee broker, but it also lists the buyer's agent commission. I could have gone there and said that there's no commission, but I did want to encourage folks to get a good amount of traffic on it. So I offered a 3% commission to the buyer's agent in a market where I was seeing that the typical percentage was 2.5%. So I actually boosted it up a little bit and offered a 3% commission to the buyer's agent because I wanted to encourage the other agents out there to really push my property and then also encourage higher value, for the property because it was a bigger payday for the agent. I could have went the route and said that there's no commission, but I probably wouldn't have gotten the traffic that I received on it without. I was able to get a good amount of traffic, but I was also okay with paying the 3% because I was able to save another 3% from the commission that I would have had to pay my listing broker. I figured it was a small price to pay. So another thing which you need to also be able to do is coordinate showings. So part of the flat fee is that you have to coordinate the showings yourself, which is something that a traditional brokerage or agency would do themselves. But with this flat fee, you have to do it on your own. So when my property was listed on the MLS, my number was the contact number, but these were only agents that had this information. So all the agents would actually call me. I had to go and arrange all of the showings. Now, for me, it wasn't that much of a time suck for me because the property that I had, it was a condo. So I was able to just put a lockbox there. And I guess if you have a home, it's probably easier to do that too. And the home, and at the time it was empty. It worked in that sense. So I left a lockbox at the door so they had access to the building and they had access to the unit itself. So the agent would reach out to me. I would just verify that they are a legit agent. You don't want to just send it to random folks. So I did put on the listing that they had to be represented by an agent. And the reason why I did that is because I know that anyone who I'm giving the code to, it's a code to an agent and not to a random person. Again, that was another reason why I made sure I did the buyer commission, the 3%. So that way I gave all the agents the code. I never gave it to a potential buyer directly. And they would go in, get the lockbox key, and they were able to access and come in and out of the unit as see fit. They make sure the key was back. It was a relatively smooth experience. So I never had to go over there to do any showings. If you're in a position where you don't want to do the showings, or let's say it's your home and you're already there. Do the showings. You can have the agents come by, step out of the house for a little bit, and you should be okay. And what I was realizing is these agents were calling me. Some of them didn't understand it, which I thought was actually pretty surprising that they didn't know, because I would figure that something like this could be a real threat, to their business. Agents would call me and they say, "Oh, so you're selling this house yourself?" I said, "I have an agent." But they didn't understand. They said, "Well, why are we calling you and not the agent?" I said, "This is how this thing works." And they would keep asking me, "So you do have a broker?" Yes, I do. My flat fee broker was the broker of record. And I know that they were also asking me because they said, "Well, look, if you're selling this thing yourself, let me represent you." So I know that's what the angle they were looking to do. Once you already have a broker on record, that's it. No, they can't come in and swoop in. So yes, I was actually pretty surprised that some of the agents that I was speaking to when I was coordinating the showing, they didn't quite understand the process, which I would be worried, because personally, I feel that on many properties, at least on the residential side, the value that you're paying a real estate agent these days does not equal the value that they are providing. And my experience through this process had definitely proved that. Now, I won't say that all agents don't provide the value, But I would say for certain properties that they're needed. So I would say maybe commercial, they're necessary. Or and if you are in residential, if it's a property where you're either at the very low end, then you may want to have an agent that had the value to maybe really reach out to folks that may specialize in that on the low end. Or if you're selling something that's very high-end property. Obviously, with high-end properties, you have a limited number of people that can afford it. You have to be in a network. So that part I understand. But as far as, properties in the middle, and especially if you're a populated place, I can't see a value of paying an agent 4 to 6%, of the total value of the property to list the property on the internet. And I guess the value that agents also provide is knowing the market. For me, I did a certain amount of research as far as what the value might be and have a realistic look as far as what I think the property was worth. So now maybe if you're not able to be that objective with the property, for me, this was an investment property. I wasn't really that attached to it. But maybe if it's your home, you might be a little more attached to it. You might have an idea that it's worth more than what it really is. If you think you have that problem, then maybe listing on your own isn't for you, because the other part of that is when you go the flat fee route, you got to handle all negotiations too. I did a couple of rounds of negotiation. In fact, I agreed to one price, but before we signed, I don't know if that makes me a bad guy, but before we signed, we agreed verbally on a price, and before we signed off, I got higher offer. So I had to go back to the other agent and said, look, you got to give me a little more. And they did, and it worked out. Another alternative that you can do to get support, if you do go this route, is get an attorney. I know a real estate attorney is not necessarily required in every state, but in some states they are, and you have attorneys that perform the closings. If you have a real estate attorney and they're pretty good, you can actually have them act on your behalf as well. You may have to pay the attorney a little bit more, but guess what? They're not taking 4 to 6% of the sale. When they perform the closing, they usually charge a flat fee. Pay them a little bit more, and they can represent you as far as negotiations. Now, don't expect them to know the market, but if you want them to help you with negotiations, if that's not something you're good at, then that's something that you can do. So that way you don't feel as though you're alone, because I had to have an attorney to do the closing. So if there were any little gaps that need to be filled, the attorney can help you out, because at the end of the day, they want to make sure that the transaction gets to the finish line so they can get paid. So that's something else that you can do to make the flat fee brokers thing successful for you. I also don't understand how, and realtors, you can help me out here or maybe answer this question. Why is it that if I'm selling my property, the buyer gets their realtor and their commission is coming out of my money, but they're representing the buyer's interest, which is not mine? Help me out with that. I guess you could say it helps you find the buyer. They brought the buyer to the table. But that's archaic in the realm of the internet, because nowadays most of these agents aren't finding the buyers themselves. All they're doing is throwing this thing on the MLS, and they get the phone call. So the whole 3%, 4%, or 2.5% for having access to the MLS, don't quite understand that. I can't get it. So I figured I'd share my experience with everyone, and maybe it's something that could work for you. Just Google flat rate real estate brokers or agents, and there's plenty of them out there. There's some that are nationwide. I would recommend you probably want to get someone that's local that offers it versus these companies that are nationwide. That way, if you do need a little support from the brokerage, you want someone that's somewhat familiar with the market, but try to find someone that's local and not necessarily the one that does these things all over the place. So I found one that was local, and it was a good experience for me. So that's all for now. If you have any more questions about this topic or any of the tax, accounting, or business related questions, feel free to reach out. Happy to help. All right, that's all for now. See you on the next one.